Tonight, we welcome Ssonia Ong, a video content creator with 5 million followers on TikTok. She is a wife and mother of 4 kids. Ssonia has her BA in Psych from Stanford and a Master's of Education from Harvard. She is trained as a children's mental health counselor, but pivoted unexpectedly to full-time mom and social media influencer during the pandemic. Some of Sonia's favorite things are tennis, chai lattes, and BTS. Without further ado, please welcome Ssonia Ong.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I think, honestly, you've covered it all, Renee. Just one thing is that I'm Canadian. So I'm from Vancouver, and but I did move to the US for college and graduate school. And I also lived in Minnesota for a couple years while my husband completed his medical training at the Mayo Clinic. So I've kind of lived all over the place. But we are back home in Vancouver now, and this is where we plan to stay.
All right, so I think we can get started on the Q&A now. So as usual, we're going to start off with some rapid fire questions to get us warmed up for the other ones. So first one is, what did you eat for breakfast today?
Banana bread.
Nice, that's very good. And then what is your dream vacation destination?
I would love to go to Bhutan in
I
Southeast
never
Asia.
heard of that. What's the best thing that happened to you this month?
We took our first family vacation since COVID, and and this is where I am now. We're in Whistler.
What is your favorite type of cake?
Ice cream cake.
Me too. What's your favorite type of ice cream?
Mint chocolate chip.
Oh, me too. What's your favorite holiday and why?
Christmas, because we get to celebrate Advent, and I get to experience Christmas through my kids' eyes. Okay, so Rachel, am I just starting now? Is that the end of it?
Yes. So Noelle is going to share the next slide, and then you can begin your storytelling part.
Okay. Thanks, Noelle. Okay, so here is a photo of our family. We are Ong Squad on TikTok, and I think this perfectly encapsulates who we are. We're loud, we're silly, we're imperfect. We are the opposite of Instagram, and I actually think that's the reason we've been successful on TikTok, but more about that later. My goal today is to share my journey and to talk about some of the things that I've learned along the way. I'm turning 40 next year, and I don't see a lot of you, but for those that I can see, you all look very young, and you look like you have your whole life ahead of you, which is so exciting. But as I'm sure you are well aware, life is not without its hurdles. So my hope here is that through hearing my story, you will learn something new about yourself and be better equipped to handle some of the life changes and challenges that come your way. But so before I go on, I'd just like to say, I'd love this to be as interactive as possible. If anyone has a question at any time, feel free to put up your hand, and Renee or somebody will call on you. I would love for this to be more of a conversation than a lecture. So please feel comfortable just asking away. Okay, next slide, please. This is a picture of my family, my parents and my brothers in front of our childhood home in Vancouver in about 1985. My parents were immigrants from Hong Kong and actually preceded the first big wave of Hong Kong immigrants who left in the late 80s and 90s because of the potential Chinese takeover. My parents are well educated. My dad has his MBA from Columbia and moved to Canada with an established business. He's in commercial real estate, as well as a small network of friends and contacts. But that's not to say that my parents didn't struggle. And I know their experience and their narrative really impacted the way I was raised and the values I learned early on as a child. Okay, next slide, please. Canada has a sordid history when it comes to its treatment of Asian immigrants. And I think this comes as a surprise to many people because we are a country that's known for its diversity and multiculturalism. But during World War II, for example, and this is where this picture is from, our province of British Columbia detained over 90% of Japanese Canadians and sold their businesses and properties to pay for their detention. Next slide, please. And likewise, thousands of Chinese laborers were brought in to build the Canadian Pacific Railway in the late 1800s because Chinese workers were cheap and industrious. But as soon as the project was over, the federal government enacted a prohibitive head tax on all Chinese immigrants for the next 38 years, followed by a complete ban of all Chinese immigrants for 24 years after that. So there were decades and decades of systemic racism in Canada. And it wasn't until after World War II and Chinese Canadians were returning from fighting overseas as part of the Canadian military that the government finally recognized their status and gave them the right to vote. Okay, next slide, I think. Okay. So that was your Canadian history lesson in 2 minutes. And it kind of sets the backdrop for my family's arrival to Canada in the early 1980s. I think my parents might have been worried about the status of Hong Kong, but above all, I think they just really wanted to give my brothers and me the education and lifestyle that North America and the West had to offer. We went to the best private schools. This is a picture from my graduation. My parents really pushed us in all areas of academics, sports, music, extracurriculars. My dad was busy running his business, and yet he came to every single one of my track meets, soccer games, volleyball tournaments. He was the parent standing in the pouring rain at the end of the track with a stopwatch in his hand. And if it wasn't a stopwatch, it was a giant Canon point and shoot camera. He was that dad, incredibly devoted and invested in my life and well-being. Looking back, I think I have a better appreciation now of what my parents had to go through to give me and my brothers the opportunities we had. Random stories will come up about how my dad didn't play golf at a certain club because the members there were hostile toward Chinese people. And of course, these clubs were as much about business and social networking as anything else. So I know that he faced a lot of hardships on many levels, and that to this day, I probably don't even know the half of it because it was never something that he talked about. But his experience and the way he learned to overcome the various roadblocks in his personal and professional life had a direct impact on me. And this is what I want each of you to think about today. How does your childhood and upbringing, which is the direct result of your parents' narrative, impact your worldview and your life choices today? My dad taught me to look around at my opportunities. I went to this great school and I had access to the best teachers, sports teams, clubs, organizations. But because there were people who did not wish for my dad's success, he taught me to work hard, but quietly. Put your head down, stay in your lane, and maximize your output within the limits that are set before you. So this became my goal. Assimilation was the key to my dad's success and survival, really. So I became an expert at conformity. Instead of going to Chinese school, I entered and won English writing competitions. Instead of learning Chinese dance, I became the captain of the varsity track, volleyball, and tennis teams. I did play the piano, which was about the most Asian thing that I did. But other than that, there really wasn't any noticeable difference between my life and that of my Caucasian school friends. We ate Chinese food at home, but my mom also made spaghetti and meatloaf. Okay, next slide, please. And this work ethic, this commitment to academic achievement and extracurriculars worked. I got into Stanford, my dream school, and then I went to Harvard on scholarship for my graduate studies. My parents really gave me every opportunity they could and guided me according to a formula they thought would work. And it did. I know someone's saying the crowd. It's it's surreal during COVID times to see that many people, I think. Okay, next slide, please. This next picture is my 10-year reunion, and both of those were my roommates from college. So yeah, my parents really gave me every opportunity they could and guided me according to a formula they thought would work, and it did. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. My education, my research experience, and the lifelong friendships I now enjoy are priceless. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now fast forward 20 years. I am now raising 4 kids under 12, and it is so interesting to see not only what a different world and culture they live in now, but also how my attitude and parenting style differs from that of my parents. Because of Gen Z, we have Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and a society that calls for more inclusivity for marginalized groups, which I think is remarkable. My kids view themselves as more Canadian than I ever did. Growing up, I identified first as Chinese, and Canadian was really just a label on my passport. But my kids are now part of a generation that not only proclaims its identity, but defines it. And while there's much progress to celebrate, research is showing that there are also some very concerning outcomes for kids like mine, who are children of non-immigrants, when compared to children of immigrants like me and my brothers. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so I don't know if anybody watched the latest Scripps National Spelling Bee, but for the first time in its history this year, there was a shared prize between 8 kids who completely exhausted the list of words from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And what's interesting is that 7 out of 8 of the winners were children of immigrants. Across the board, children of immigrants have better academic outcomes than children of non-immigrants. Children of immigrants are also less likely to get in trouble at school or to engage in delinquent criminal behavior, and they experience less anxiety compared to children of non-immigrants. And so what accounts for these differences? Next slide, please. Okay, so Leonard Sachs is an MD, a clinical psychologist, and author of The Collapse of Parenting. And he cites 3 protective factors that give immigrant children like me the edge over non-immigrant children like my kids. So the first is stronger family ties. Immigrant families are usually led by a married couple and characterized by cohabitation with extended family like grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And this was true of my family. My grandmother lived with us for my entire childhood. The second is mutual respect. Over the last 30 years, North American culture has moved away from a model of mutual respect to one of free and independent expression. So for example, next slide, please. These are the kinds of t-shirts that are all the rage right now. On the left, it says breaking news, I don't care. And on the right, it says free hugs, just kidding, don't touch me. And so, this kind of messaging affects kids' attitudes toward other people, and especially toward their own parents and grandparents. And when they espouse these attitudes, it affects the strength of family ties. And then can we go back to the slide before, if possible? Thank you. Okay. And then the third factor is stricter parenting. Many of today's parents view strictness as synonymous with harshness, and instead take the opposite stance of, well, I just want to make my kids happy, and therefore I will let them make their own choices and do as they please. And so what ends up happening is we see kids and preteen girls, with very active social media presences, and boys, playing endless hours of video games because their most valued community is with those they're live streaming with. This last point is especially troubling to me. My parents were so strict in terms of TV time, where I was allowed to go, who I could hang out with, how much time I should be committing to schoolwork, etc. Whereas I don't push my kids at all. My kids don't even play piano. Shocker, I know. So this issue of permissive parenting has been an area that I've had to pay close attention to, because at the end of the day, I don't want my kids looking to their peers for advice or guidance. I want them to come to me. Not to mention, they're growing up in a digital age where their lives will be inextricably connected with technology. So, how do I, as a parent, and particularly one who is a social media influencer, navigate this modern area of parenting? Okay, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, the one after. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Last spring, my kids were home from school because our province was placed on pandemic lockdown. And if I'm going to be honest, it was an extremely stressful time for us. My husband is a cardiac intensivist, and we had pretty much watched New York City go down in flames. And so we were fearing for the worst. I quickly found out that I am not skilled as a homeschool teacher, and it was miserable trying to get through virtual learning. Around this time, I happened upon my first TikTok video. It was someone doing a lip sync to a Disney song. And I thought, hey, you know what? We've got our whole family at home. Let's make a video for fun. And then everything just went from there. 15 months later, we're at over 5 million followers. And I have found myself unexpectedly in a new and you know, in a new career. So the question now of, I'm just going to get a drink of water, sorry. Okay. So the question now of parenting in an age of social media, but where social media is my job, is an interesting one. I don't know if any of you've seen my content, but I don't show my kids on camera. I feature their voices, but I keep their identities private. And I do this for a number of reasons. First, social media is not a friendly place. Strangers show up with all kinds of opinions, and I just don't want to make my kids unnecessary targets. Second, while social media can be a place of connection and learning, it's also, in my opinion, dangerous and harmful to a developing child. And here's why. One of the biggest challenges that I face as a content creator is trying not to measure my success by my numbers. So, for example, if I post a piece of content and it flops, or worse, I have a week of bad videos, it's hard not to feel a sense of failure and rejection. And I'm speaking as an almost 40-year-old who has a strong sense of self. So for a child or even a teenager who is still forming their identity, social media is like a spotlight where you're subjecting yourself to other people's judgment. It's potentially very damaging to your self-esteem, but more importantly, it's unhealthy to establish your worth and base your identity in what other people think, to begin with. So needless to say, at this point, I've decided to keep my kids off social media. When they're old enough, I think for TikTok, it's 15. And if they have an interest, then we will have a conversation to ensure that they're making good decisions and keeping themselves safe. Okay, last slide, I think. Thank you. In summary, we are, each of us, the product of our childhood. Our parents, actually, this is not the, is there another slide after this? Maybe the takeaway slides, can we go to that? Oh, perfect. Okay. So, in summary, we are, each of us, the product of our childhood. Our parents raise us according to their goals and values, and their choices impact the way we live and think. My parents were immigrants, and because of their struggle, they pushed my brothers and me on a path that they thought would minimize our struggle. We all develop a worldview that's shaped by our past experiences, and we bring that mindset into our current roles and relationships. Growing up, I only knew about assimilation and conformity, but we now live in a culture that celebrates personal identity and individual expression. So my challenge as a parent is figuring out how to raise my kids in this world, but with the values that are important to my husband and me. Technology will be a big part of our kids' lives, so it's critical that we teach them how to use it safely and responsibly. And then lastly, I believe we are best equipped to navigate our life situations when we embrace our past and acknowledge our strengths and shortcomings. So understanding that I come with a certain set of habits and beliefs, some good, some not so great. But if I can recognize that, I'm better able to pass on the good to other people and to my kids. So that's it. I am happy to, if anybody has any questions or comments.
Yeah, so now we're gonna begin the Q&A portion. Renee, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so the first question that we have on our list is, did you let your family know about any challenges you faced? And if so, how did you communicate your struggles with them?
Okay, so I'm going to take this question in kind of a different direction because I think one thing that might be interesting to you guys is, so when I started on social media on TikTok last spring, I started to grow really fast, but I was terrified of telling my parents. And so actually I didn't tell my family because honestly, I was afraid of what they would think about me, their, very private and conservative Harvard educated daughter now making stupid videos on social media and exposing myself and my family in this really silly way. And so I actually didn't tell my parents until I had passed 1 million followers and I had secured my first um, brand deal with Toyota car company. So I landed this big deal. I did a commercial for them and it did really well. And then so I kind of presented it to my parents as like this big package, like a package deal, like, hey mom, hey dad, like look what I've been doing and look where it's going. And so I think at first there was a lot of concern about um, you know, like they're just really conservative and they're private people. And there was just a lot of concern about my safety, about being on such a public platform. But, I assured them my kids aren't in my videos. Nobody knows even my name, actually. I don't even put my name up on there. We're Ong Squad. So they've come around and now my dad is my biggest fan.
Wow, Toyota, that's so cool. The next question is, what was your college experience like given that you attended very prestigious universities?
So I would say that my 4 years at Stanford were some of the best years of my life. I mean, honestly, I'm so grateful for that time that I had there and, to be able to grow up in that kind of a setting. It's so beautiful. And I met some really fantastic friends. But, just going to a place where it was so diverse. One of my roommates was literally the daughter of the king of Bhutan. Okay, that's why I want to go to Bhutan because my roommates are part of the royal family there. But I had friends who were royalty and I had friends who were homeless when they were growing up. So there was just such a diversity of people and the teaching was just next level. I seldom had a professor who didn't write the textbook on what they were teaching. So you're really getting the best of everything. And it was just such a special time where I feel like I matured as an individual and kind of grew into adulthood there.
Yeah, that was a great answer. That's so cool that your roommate was like part of the royal family of Bhutan. That's so cool. And another question is, why did you decide on the career of being a trauma therapist?
Okay, yes. So I didn't mention this in my talk, but so after Stanford, I went to Harvard and did a master's in counseling and in education and counseling. And then after that, I worked as a trauma counselor at the BC Children's Hospital, which is our local children's hospital here in Vancouver. And I knew ever since I was a child that I loved children. So it's funny, my mom kept these books that I had written when I was, I think, 8. And I had drawn pictures and written paragraphs underneath each pictures. And in one of them, I said, when I grow up, I'm going to have 4 kids. And sure enough, I am grown up and I've got 4 kids. So I knew, when I was 8 that I wanted to have a big family and I wanted to be a mom. So when I graduated from high school, I thought, well, if I love kids, then naturally I should be a teacher. So when I was at Stanford, I actually had a chance to take a teaching class. Um, and I knew after like half an hour, maybe not even half an hour, that this was not for me. Like I was in the classroom with the teacher and just kind of observing, and I realized for the first time that being a teacher is really a lot about management, classroom management. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like, teachers have a special skill set and I lack that skill set. So I started paying attention to the kids who actually consumed all of the teacher's attention. And oftentimes these were kids who were very active or, talkative or whatever. And so I started getting interested in mental health. And so so I started doing research actually at Stanford, and I kind of went into that direction of studying kids who have trauma backgrounds and how that affects their experience.
So it
Yeah,
looks
so
like someone asked a question. So I think we can answer that one before we move on. If you want to just read it, I'm not sure if they're okay with reading it out loud.
Okay, let's see. Is it Denise's question? Is that the first one?
Yes.
Okay, so it says, have you received negative feedback for being a person of faith, as I have in San Francisco at a cafe with my support group? The elected president of our local chapter called me a Christian hater bigot because my teenage son was a member of Boy Scout troop. I appreciate your openness. Hold on. To discussing the importance of your faith. Okay, so have you received negative feedback for being a person of faith? I assume you're asking about uh, being a person of faith on my platform. Is that right? Like on TikTok? Um, I haven't yet, and I'm open about it on there. I don't make videos about my faith, but I certainly in the comments section, people always ask me because I wear, a cross, and my my content is very wholesome. So people ask me if what religion am I? Do you support Palestine? What do you think about, Muslims or whatever? So, and I answer very honestly in my comments, and I will say, we are devout Christians, and we're very active in our church. Um, you know, I answer their questions about the Israel and Palestine thing. Like I have to be really careful when I'm answering those kinds of questions, because the thing about social media is I can grow to 5 million followers in a year. I can also be canceled in 5 seconds. So, I have to be really careful about how I answer people's questions. And so what I do is for example, I have a series where I teach about, I'll show my kids flags of different countries, and we'll talk about, that country's language and food and culture. And so I try to make that as diverse as possible. Like I will hold up a flag of Pakistan or Bangladesh or whatever. And especially if that country is having political problems or any kind of issues at the time, I will celebrate that country and not necessarily get into the politics of it. But I think, and I hope that people will feel that, generally we are, you know, loving and accepting of all cultures and nations. And I actually have a large following from the Middle East. My husband and I have talked about this, and, why is that the case? And I think it's because, as a Christian and as a Chinese person, we are conservative, and, we put out just kind of positive and wholesome content. And I think maybe a lot of Muslim women can relate. Right. So we really have strong family values. And so, I have a large following from like Egypt, Morocco, those Middle Eastern countries. And we love to celebrate their culture. So we try to be inclusive. We try to be kind to everybody. And at the same time, I'm very open about my own faith as well. So that's kind of how we navigate it. And we'll see what happens in the future, but it's been okay so far. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, great answer. Hopefully that helped, Denise. And then I guess we can continue on. So the next question is, since you're still making your way in your career path, where do you envision yourself in the next few years?
Yeah, yeah, that, I'll tell you, a year ago, or just a little over a year ago, when I first started posting videos on TikTok, I had no idea that it would get to this point in time. And the truth is, a couple months before that, so like right before the pandemic, I had kind of a traumatic late term miscarriage. And so, I was like reeling from that. And that took me a long time to grieve and to overcome. Um, and so, and then we were in the pandemic and my kids were home. So it was like actually a really miserable time for me. So I just couldn't have imagined that a year later, I would be sitting here talking to you guys about this platform. So, I think one thing that I do know for sure is I don't know what the future holds ever. God has a plan for me and a reason. Things happen and I just don't know. But I have thought about things like, well, now that I have this platform and there's people who are listening to what I have to say, what do I have to say? And one thing that I've always wanted to do is to write a children's book series on mental health, particularly in Asian American families, because like in my family, I have a couple members who suffer from mental illness, and it is just so taboo I feel, in my culture. Um, and I think that actually inhibits a lot of people from getting the help that they need. So maybe that's something that I will try to do in the next year or two, is to kind of think about what kind of a book I could write.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Um, and then what advice would you give the audience about having to make big life decisions, since you've made so many?
What advice I would give? I think don't don't fear making mistakes. I think that, at least for me, is what drove me for a long time, is fear of making a wrong choice and kind of having to face the consequences of poor decisions. But um, in my mind, like God is in control, and whatever I prayerfully consider and I think about things carefully, but um, everything happens for a reason and it's going to be okay. And he works for our good. So, go forward, make good choices, be thoughtful about them, but don't be afraid. I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then I think we can do one more question. So what advice, I know you talked about how you raised your kids during the pandemic. Do you have any other advice that you could give other Asian American mothers raising kids during the pandemic as well?
Yeah, I would say give yourself some grace. These are unprecedented times. There are no expectations, right? Like, we've never been in this situation where we've had our kids at home for this long, where, we've been in charge of their education. Like, I think let go of your expectations and recognize that, we are in just really unusual times. And I think for me, I really need to just focus on my kids' happiness instead of thinking, they need to accomplish this math skill or this reading assignment, whatever. It's you know I'm trying to pay attention to, okay, are these kids happy? Are they able to really value the time that we're having at home as a family? Because that's what's going to impact them later, and that's what they're going to remember, is was this a good time for them, and an enjoyable time for them. And so that's kind of become my goal. I've turned that stress into, instead of having to get all these things done in terms of academics or whatever, in terms of their schooling, to just, can I create an environment for them where they're just really happy? So.
Yeah, thank you so much for those wonderful and well spoken answers. And now we would like to thank Ssonia for taking the time to join us for an Aspiring Talks and the major takeaways that she displayed. Tonight, she led us through her life journey and how her upbringing as a child of immigrants shaped her life. I hope you all gained insight on how to think about your own childhood and how your parents' experiences also impact your worldview. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight.
Sonia, if you have any other thank yous, feel free to share them right now.
Yeah, just, thank you to Renee and Rachel and Noelle and everybody at Aspire for this opportunity. This is such a different, this is so different from what I normally do. My husband has taken my kids out, so it's been quiet for an hour, which has been amazing. And, just to be able to connect with other adults. I feel like I've been holed up with my kids for like a year and a half. So I really appreciate it. And there's just one thing on here that if anybody wants to email me as well, my email is ongsquadron@gmail.com. I'm happy to hear from anybody. And if anybody has any further questions, you can contact me there. Oh, thank you. Perfect.
Wonderful. And so we will be sending out the slide deck and recap in an email. And we encourage you all to follow Sonia as well as Aspire on her various social media platforms included in the chat and on the screen right there. And at this point, we'd like to invite you to join us for an additional 15-minute Q&A if you have any other questions that you want to ask off recording. Otherwise, have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you at our next event on September 10th with our next speaker, Erden Weiner. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.